Theology Unplugged.
Welcome to session 39 of Through Theology in a Year. My name is Michael Patton, and we are continuing our trek through theology, all through systematic theology in 1 year. If you'd like to, please go to my Patreon, find that, check it out, search around. You'll be able to see all kinds of posts, lots of free stuff too that you can access right now. You could subscribe for free, but you can also become a member and support what I'm doing here. That is the way to support if you wanted to find a way to support. Okay, we are going to talk today about a trek from darkness to light, and what we're going to focus on here, because we're still in epistemology. We're still in prolegomena. A lot of prolegomena is epistemology. I mean, it can be put under that category because we're trying to figure out how we can know things, how we can learn things, how it is whenever we research, what is our mindset whenever we're researching, what is the expectations whenever we're researching, and how does faith play a part in that? That's going to be a big part of today, the part that faith plays in everything up until now. And some of you may have been wondering this. Hey, is he ever going to talk about faith? Well, I am going to today, and I'm going to try to help us understand how we got to a point where it looks like this. You have a blind man searching in the dark. You have rationality compared to a blind leap into the dark. And this poor guy, he can't find anything. He's got a blindfold on. He's blind and he's got a blindfold on. So he's searching in the dark, and whenever he finds something and whenever he latches onto something from the perspective of our culture today, that is what true faith really looks like. So through theology in a year, here we go. From evolution of faith, from light to darkness. Okay, there's our guy searching around. Blind faith. How did we get to the point where when we define faith in our culture, no matter who you're talking to, faith is seen as a blind leap into the dark. It is something that you do. It's virtuous for some people. People are faithful people sometimes, and it is even looked at in the culture as something somewhat virtuous. I mean, you can be a faithful person. You can have your faith over here. It brings you comfort. Today, we're very open to the opioid of faith, or the opium of faith, as it's been called. The opium of faith is basically saying that we, as faithful people, are free to pursue faith. We're free to pursue our religion. We're free to pursue all that which is outside of the realm of science and rationality. Science and rationality, those are completely separate. A second way to come to know things, a sure way to come to know things. But at the same time, you can have your little kind of fairy tales on the side. We're not calling them fairy tales because we respect them. But at the same time, how did we get to this point? Because whenever I talk about faith to people, I'm trying to correct people's definition of faith and help people understand how faith integrates with reason. And it's not an easy thing because of the misperceptions. And so today we're going to walk through and talk about how we got to a place where faith is a blind leap. And the next time we're going to talk about certainty. And it's a very big part of this. So it's a natural progression from where we have gone so far. Now, in our trek through theology in a year and through philosophy, here's my guys right here. Here's what I want to look at. I want to look at all of these guys right here. René Descartes, John Locke, and David Hume, and Immanuel Kant. All of these are absolute giants in philosophy. These are people we want to know about. I think they're very significant whenever it comes to understanding how faith in the Western world has been perceived. Now, first of all, before we even get to them, I probably should have put a picture up there. Maybe I should have put, if I was going to add two people to this, I would have added St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas. Or maybe even or maybe Averroes, the Muslim scholar, because he was very important in this. But what you have is you go back you go back to the 4th century, 400 years after Christ, and people see the faith was seen very highly. It wasn't seen as this second side source where you have to put a blindfold on. It was part of everything. There was no way you could separate faith from reason. And St. Augustine was one of the first that came up with this, where he came up with credo ut intelligam, faith, or I believe, in order to understand. This was a dictum in the early church. This was a dictum across the world because people recognized the necessity of a first step of faith before you could even understand anything. There was a step of faith that had to happen. Now you may say, Michael, that was back then. We know that that's not true. We don't take a step of faith before we go into reason and rationality. Yes, we do. You must. And let me tell you something. Even if you don't think you do, you do. Everybody has to pursue rationality by faith first. Credo ut intelligam. You have this extended all the way until the 11th century, where you have a guy named Anselm. Anselm was very important in this as well because he was kind of like a transition scholar. He still followed the Augustinian route that Augustine had defined, not set up, but defined. He followed the Augustinian route where he talked about not I believe in order to so I can understand. He talked about faith or theology as faith seeking understanding. Fides ut intelligam. Faith seeking understanding. So again, the same dictum. I believe in order to understand, faith seeking understanding. Well, where did the transition happen? Well, you had this guy, this Muslim scholar. You see, Muslims weren't the first, of course, to have the Greek influence of Aristotle, but they quickly, in Spain, translated all of Aristotle's works into their language, and they began to respect it. At least a certain segment of the Muslim world began to respect Aristotle quite a bit. Therefore, they respected reason. It's not as if Aristotle didn't believe in faith. He did. I mean, you could study that, and it's a very important part of what we're talking about. But the way they interpreted it was that Aristotle emphasized reason, and there became this two-truth theory, two truths. Averroes advocated this. And the two truths were basically this. There is truths you come by through religious conviction, faith, and then there are truths you come by through reason, rationality. And so these two sources were what entered into the 13th century whenever you have a guy named St. Thomas Aquinas. And St. Thomas Aquinas, probably the most influential theologian since St. Augustine and before Martin Luther. So right in between you would have Anselm and Aquinas. Aquinas outshining him, though, because he wrote so prolifically on this subject. And Aquinas, in some sense, integrated Averroes's methodology and Saul, not that we have faith in order to understand, but that they were two sources. But he didn't go as far as Averroes, because Averroes would say these two sources can contradict, they can lead us in different directions, but ultimately they're really the same. They lead to the same place. Okay, that's kind of the idea. Well, Aquinas came in and he said, no, faith, reason, rationality, philosophy was the handmaiden to theology. It was used to serve theology. So it was subservient. Okay, so he put it underneath, not as a two-source equal, but underneath it. And so Aquinas developed his philosophy to where faith and reason were two separate resources, but reason served, philosophy served faith, or served Christ, served his understanding of religion. That's why you have St. Thomas Aquinas writing so prolifically and using rationality in order to demonstrate the reality of the Christian faith. So this is the way it went for quite some time. But remember, you have the Enlightenment. You have the lights being turned on. You have information, the printing press, bringing information to everybody, science discovering things, mathematics, I mean, all kinds of stuff just exploding. And so rationality was being used more and more prolifically while faith was being set aside quite a bit. Now, at this time, there was mass skepticism. I mean, this was the 17th century. You have mass skepticism. You have France. France is always skeptical of religion. They've been that way for a long time. And you have a movement going on to where it is just a massive skeptical approach. And you have this young guy named René Descartes. And he was at a conference listening to a guy that was trying to restore confidence that we could know things. Because like I said, skepticism was massively on the rise. And this guy was presenting that basically based on probability, you know, we could have evidence, use the evidence, because that was the new thing, science and evidence. We could use this science in order to build a probability factor towards knowledge. Okay. Descartes didn't like this. He was going to have none of this. He did not like this idea of probability, that we could just say something was probably true. He was very prolific already at the time at a young age, but a cardinal of the Catholic Church found him, Descartes, I believe was his name, but Descartes found him and said, hey, guy, I like you. I like what you got going on. I like your enthusiasm. Why don't I assign you? Because, I mean, you only have 80 cardinals in the Catholic Church. They're the guys that elect the Pope. So he was high up in the Catholic Church. And in the 14th century, 17th century, we still got some influence, some pretty significant influence. And so he assigned René Descartes to use his methodology, saying, hey, listen, you like to find things that are without a doubt. You like this kind of indubitability thing, this beyond a doubt, indubitable, beyond a doubt. And so he assigns René Descartes to build a faith that can prove God's existence without a doubt. Kind of like the same thing that happened with Anselm a while back, but this is much, much later. So you have René Descartes, who is assigned, hey, go and figure out how it is that we can know God exists without a doubt. We don't have to go by probability. And here's what happened. René Descartes thinks and thinks and thinks. Okay, he's a thinking guy, and he's at his house. He's thinking. There's a place in his house that he called the furnace. And it wasn't the furnace, actually. Nobody believes that. But he would always say that he went up into his furnace to think. That was the best place for him to think. It was probably an upper room in the house that just got really hot and stayed really hot, or maybe it was the one that had the furnace in it, but he called it his furnace. And he said, I'm staying in this furnace until I figure out how it is that I can prove God's existence without a doubt. No doubts, indubitable. That's the most important thing. And so while he did not start with the assumption of God, while he was in there thinking, doubting everything, using the skeptic's method, kind of bowing to the skeptic's method just for a little bit in order to use it against him, he said, fine, I'll doubt everything. Just like everybody wants, I'll doubt everything. I'm going to start with absolutely nothing. And so he basically doubts everything. He doubts everything from, all the truths he's learned up in the Catholic Church. He's a Christian. He intentionally gets rid of everything. This is kind of a deconstruction. This is what we go through a lot in our lives. Well, he was going through a deconstruction, but it was one that was self-initiated. It was one that was assigned by a cardinal. And so as he's doubting, he said, how can I know? What's the most foundational truth that there is? Doubt everything. So he's doubting. Then one day, all of a sudden, he's like, whoa, I just thought of it. He can come out of his furnace now because he comes up with a dictum. He says, if I'm doubting, I'm a doubter. And if I'm a doubter, then I do exist. So at least the one thing I cannot deny is my own existence, because in order to doubt my own existence, I have to assume my own existence. So voila, cogito ergo sum. That's where you have, I think, therefore I am. This became a very, very important thing. René Descartes is the father of rationalism. which basically means he is the father of all those who think you can build your knowledge base from the ground up with absolute assurance. Now, notice what happened here. You have a while back, Aquinas saying that faith was ruled over rationality. Rationality was the handmaiden to faith. Philosophy was. Now, at this time, it had built so much, and the church is kind of conceding, fine, let's take rationality as a completely different source, and let's do rationality alone. Let's don't do faith, which beforehand Augustine would be rolling over in his grave. He'd say, you can't do that. That's impossible. But at the same time, here's what they're doing. And so they concede, and René Descartes comes up with the dictum, I think, therefore I am. And from there builds everything. I mean, René Descartes was the father of geometry. He was father of all kinds of mathematics. Incredibly, incredibly smart guy. But from that point, you have the rationalists. Okay, I want you to understand, the rationalists were a very important part of philosophical history. And they are a very important part of the way we're going to think of theology throughout all of the theology program and how we're going to approach it. That's why I use this. That's why I focus on this. René Descartes built the idea of rationality, that rationality was a completely separate source in the West, and it was the most assured source. It was the one you could build from the ground up, and as long as you could connect everything, I think, therefore I am. Well, how did I become to be? I didn't create myself, therefore there must be some God that created me. And he came up with all kinds of ways to even prove the existence of God, which weren't really that great. They weren't as good as his I think, therefore I am. But at the same time, they did connect, and it did make sense. And we could see how René Descartes felt like he was building his faith from the ground up without having any doubts needed anymore. There was no doubts needed. That's the idea. Probability is gone. Yeah, it's not probably true. It is absolutely certain. Notice that. That's the key. You got to understand this. Absolute certainty is birthed as if it is not only a possibility, but it is the king of all knowledge. Okay, that's where we're going. That's where you got to know. Okay, put a pin in that, and let's go to the next person. Okay, now you go to a guy named John Locke. Sorry, the pictures I don't have the best pictures, but John, and I only got what I can work with. I probably should have had AI create something, but anyway, John Locke was not a rationalist. He did not follow the same pattern that René Descartes did. René Descartes was very rational, used his mind, only got knowledge. If you could close your eyes and figure out everything you can know just from what you already know, what you're pre-programmed with, that's rationality, pre-programmed, in the mind alone. John Locke comes in and says, I don't think it's in the mind alone. Actually, I think you think it's in the mind alone. But everything we know, everything comes from experience, sense experience, what we see on the outside of us, what we can taste, what we can touch, what we can smell. That's what we're born, what he said, with a blank slate. So a blank slate, tabula rasa, that was a very important dictum. So the dictum before was cogito ergo sum. Now it's tabula rasa. Tabula rasa means blank slate. We are born with a blank slate, and that is where we get our information from. Everything on the outside comes in and produces information. He was the father, not really the father, because you also have Francis Bacon, who is really the father of this, but he wasn't as extreme, even though Francis Bacon was considered the father of what's called empiricism, empirical. We talk about empirical things that you can see, taste, touch, smell, those things that are outside of us, things that you build from the outside. Empiricism was at least the radical empiricism birthed at this time in contradiction to René Descartes' radical rationalism. So you had those like John Locke, who said, let us suppose the mind to be, as we say, white paper, void of all characters, without any ideas, How comes it to be furnished? To this I answer, one word, from experience. That is the best quote you can have about empiricism. So then you have the battle between the empiricist and the rationalist, and they're trying to figure out who is right and which one has more credibility. And the rationalists are focused on the mind, the intuition, things that you just automatically know, reason, mathematics, deduction, and finally, the most important thing is certainty. So at least the rationalists had this. They said, at least we can come to certain conclusions. You can't come to certain conclusions. So again, the idea of certainty is still out here. Is there such a thing as absolute certainty? Rationalist? Yes. Well, here comes John Locke. He was a doctor. John Locke was a doctor, so he was thinking differently. And so he said, no, here's where we get all of our information from. Not from the mind, but from sensation. Not from intuition, but from experience. Not from reason, but from science. Not from mathematics, but through testing. Not deduction, where you start with something and then you deduct until you get to its base level, but induction, where you build from the outside. You build the evidence. And the key difference is this. Rationalism proposed certainty, while empiricism imposed probability. Okay? That's what René Descartes was very much against, was the idea of probability. So battle, which one's true? And both of them seem to have influence, and both of them seem to have validity, and that's the key. You got to see the validity that both of these had at this time. And then we can move to the next step. The next step is very, very important, and you have a guy named David Hume. David Hume was the father of skepticism. Now, at this time, David Hume comes in, and he completely, and at least in his mind, now from the broader standpoint, no, he didn't, but he believes he completely demolishes René Descartes. Because René Descartes, remember, faith is gone at this time. I mean, the only two options is sense experience and rationality, what you come pre-programmed with. Even if you're Christian, like René Descartes was. He was a Catholic Christian who believed in God, who believed that God placed this rationality inside of him, and therefore it mirrored God. Part of his arguments were that he wouldn't have this without God, therefore God exists. So that was part of his deduction. But you have faith kind of being set aside because these are the only two things you need in order to come to know truth. Faith is no longer necessary. Faith is starting to leave, right? And it's not completely gone at this point, but this is what's happening. Please understand this. It's so important. That's why whenever David Hume comes in, David Hume basically says, wait a minute, you got it wrong. First of all, let me critique, first of all, the rationalism. Whenever René Descartes gets in his little oven and goes down to the think I, therefore I am, he thinks he's building from the bottom up, therefore deduction. He thinks he's got it figured. He thinks he's got base level, but the problem is he is assuming already something that I think, therefore I am creates it assumes the idea of cause and effect, causality. Causality is what is assumed by René Descartes. He doesn't build causality from the ground up. Just because there's a cause and an effect, David Hume would come in and say, where did he get that from? Where did he get the idea that thinking produces I aming, being? You have to assume it. It's something that is already we just assume it. We can't defend it. There's no way to show the law of non-contradiction. You just assume it. You start with the law of non-contradiction. David Hume comes in and says, I demolish every bit of rationalism because rationalism's proposal to create absolute certainty, indubitability, is false because it starts with assumptions, namely the law of causality. The law law of non-contradiction. Those things are already assumed. They're pre-built in to René Descartes' system. And then he goes to the rational conclusion of causality, of empiricism. And he says, okay, now let's deal with empiricism. We've set aside rationalism. We have destroyed that. Let's go over to John Locke's empiricism, Francis Bacon and John Locke's empiricism. And let's take a look at this. And so David Hume said, yeah, listen, here's the deal. Yes, you see cause and effect, and yes, you measure it, and yes, it happens over and over and over again. And yes, you can repeat these things, but that doesn't mean anything. In the end, it creates knowledge, but knowledge you can't be sure of. You cannot be positive of. The only reason a billiard ball hits another billiard ball and moves is not because it has to. It's because that's the way it always happens. We don't know why it happens that way. We don't know if it will always happen that way. We're not sure about what actually makes that billiard ball make the other billiard ball move. Maybe it is something within science, but also where did that science come from? And how do we know it's going to continue on? How do we know that the law, the empiricism that everybody sees, what we taste, touch, smell, hear, we don't know where it comes from. It's just there. The only reason you think it's knowledge is because it's always been there. Every time you have hit a billiard ball, it has moved. That is not a basis for knowledge. Therefore, it's not a basis for certainty. So David Hume was the father of all skepticism. He believed very much that we should be skeptical of everything. And this kind of threw everything in turmoil because remember, the idea at this point was to become as sure as you can and be secure, be mathematically secure in our beliefs, even beliefs in God. And so everything's getting destroyed here with David Hume, and as he destroys both the absolute certainty of rationalism and the relative certainty of empiricism, because who knows, maybe it won't happen that way. So in comes the Savior. And this Savior is Immanuel Kant. And Immanuel Kant says, listen, guys, let's get it together. Let's figure out what we're doing here, and let's put things in their proper place. And most people believe Immanuel Kant was the most brilliant man, at least since René Descartes. I've tried to read Kant myself a few times, and it is hard. It's really hard. It's grueling. At least for me, it's grueling. It's like, I can't read Shakespeare. I can't read... there's just a lot of things that whenever they just drain me. It feels like I'm listening to an organ. That's what I feel like whenever I'm listening to or reading Immanuel Kant. Just get to your point and just make it clear. You don't have the gift of teaching, that kind of thing. So Immanuel Kant comes in, though. He's a brilliant, brilliant person, and he says, let's do this. Let us, thoughts without content are empty. Intuitions without concepts are blind. So basically he comes in and he creates a synthesis, and he separates the world into two places. He says, let's do this. Let's create the phenomenal realm and the noumenal realm. And in the phenomenal realm, that's where we move and exist, and that's where we test things, and it's where we think and rationalize. That's where we do the majority of all of our, actual stuff. The world as perceived and understood it, shaped by our sensory experience and cognitive structures. So the phenomenal world is that which you see. It's phenomenal. It's that which we can perceive. That's the thing he says we can work in. Okay, we can work with this. We can build on this. But there is also what is called the noumenal realm, the world as it exists independently of our perceptions. Now, notice here the separation. This is so incredibly important. Notice the separation that's happening. Now, you finally got completely, really Averroes's two-truth theory that is being employed in the West. In the noumenal world, you have all that is true, yes, but we can't know it. There's truth out there. Yes, guys, let's all calm down. We all know there's truth. We just can't access it. It's impossible. We can't get there with absolute certainty of any sort. So keep that up in the noumenal world, and those are the things that you can believe. And down here, we'll test things. And this is where we'll use all the intellect and rationality and everything else that humans can produce. And this is kind of where we live and breathe. But in the noumenal world, what happens there? In the noumenal world, you have what you believe, faith. Okay? Faith becomes completely separated from the things that we see, taste, touch. This is completely the opposite of what St. Augustine started. Whenever St. Augustine said, I believe, therefore I am, René Descartes came in and said, I doubt, therefore I am, very literally. And then you have Kant come in and say, let's separate the two. Let's keep these two separate. Belief and reality are two separate spheres. And it wasn't as if Kant was a bad guy. It wasn't as if he was trying to destroy faith. As a matter of fact, he had a lot of arguments for the existence of God. But at the same time, whenever you have Immanuel Kant come in and separate these in the 18th century, you have from then on faith being seen as this blind leap into the dark. This guy comes back, and that's where he came from. That is the noumenal world. So therefore, from now on, everything that you have, everything that you see, everything that you believe is really a different world. Now, this is not the way we approach things. This is not the way we can approach things, because in the end, what the argument is that we're going to be making here is that it is impossible for us to do any truth, any knowledge, any epistemology, any type of, there's no type of settlement that we can come without faith first. There's faith that we place in every single aspect of what it is that we believe. Even the law of non-contradiction, we have to believe that that is true. We have to believe in the law of cause and effect. We can't prove it, it just happens. Yes, in some sense, David Hume was right, but in another sense, he was wrong, because we can believe these things, and they are justified beliefs. And where do we get these from? This is where St. Augustine comes back, faith-seeking understanding from God. God gives us the basic rationality, the basic structure, what are called properly basic beliefs now by Alvin Plantinga, but properly basic beliefs that no, we can't prove, no, we can't get into a Dutch oven and think and think and think until we have proven these things, but they are perfectly justified, even up to and including belief in God. Belief in God can be properly assumed within everything because it must be properly assumed because it is in everything. Back to Anselm and Augustine. So you see kind of the full circle we've taken, but at the same time, what we are fighting in our world today is a lot of people who believe this is us. This is Christianity. Okay, you guys are nice. I'm glad it's helping you. I'm glad that it's changing your lives. I'm glad that it helps you through the day, but it's not reality. That's Kant. But you can't defend Kant without faith. Everybody has to have this faith, and everybody has to have some type of justification for this faith and where it came from. And really a Romans 1 type deal where you say, even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks. They did not recognize him. God says in Romans chapter 1, everybody knows me. It's pre-built in a million different ways. But the key is you start by giving thanks. That's the issue. You start by recognizing me. Whenever rationality built, I'm not saying Aristotle was bad. I'm not saying rationality is bad. Not at all. We're going to be using it, but at the same time, we're going to be using it with the recognition, no matter what, that we have faith. And that faith needs to come from somewhere. And somehow it has to be grounded. And if we ground it, faith in faith, it doesn't work. You can't say, I just have faith, and I'll have faith in faith. It's just all there is. It's what a lot of people have these days, faith in faith. But what we have is we say it's grounded in God. Faith is the reason. Faith seeking understanding. That is our definition of theology as we move forward, and we're moving forward in the world of Augustine. We're getting rid of this, we're getting rid of the nominal and the phenomenal, and we're marrying those back up again. You can recognize those in some way, but you got to recognize them also as a faith-based system. This whole thing is faith-based. The entire phenomenal and the noumenal realm is faith-based. There is no separation of faith from rationality. That's the key for what we're talking about today. We're coming back into the light. We're coming back into a philosophy that not only, we're not just trying to honor God with this, we're trying to find actual truth. We're saying this is the only possibility to do it. That's why a lot of people out there are what's called presuppositional apologists, meaning they defend the faith by showing people that they already have to have the faith. It's a very Augustinian approach. You're approaching this and you're saying, listen, we all have faith. Just accept it. It's faith seeking understanding. Join me on this journey. Okay, so that is, I think that's all I got. Okay, let's see. Yeah, that's all I got. I hope that this was helpful for you. Moving from, like I said, this is the first time I've done this one. And I've done it a lot kind of out loud and not with kind of a set presentation, but I think it's important enough. And I'm really, really happy to have the opportunity during this Through Theology in a Year to start working through this with you all, to help you guys understand where where credo ut intelligam comes from. I believe in order to understand. Fides correns intellectum, faith seeking understanding, or fides ut intellectum, faith unto understanding. Those are very important foundational models, both within me, this whole program, what we're going to be doing going forward, but it's something you need to know because it's something to celebrate. It's something to rest in. It's something that we say at the very beginning of this, we rest in God. Now, we're going to keep on building, and we're going to deconstruct, reconstruct, but don't get the assumption wrong. Don't get the idea that you can do anything without faith. Everything we have to move forward with faith. It's just, where's that based? Okay, guys, we will see you next time. Thank you so much for showing up, and we'll continue by talking about certainty. How certain can we be? We'll kind of back up a little bit and restart, but this is going to be very important. The next session may be the second most important session of all that we've done so far. So don't miss it.
Theology